And thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me on Autism Live Show UK. We have another great show coming up for you on episode 6. We have lots of guests. We have Kerry, we have Norman Lamb MP, and we have Sally Russell OBE. And also later in the show, I'll be joined by Bethany's dad, Jeremy. He'll be giving us an update on Bethany's case. So first of all, I would like to introduce the Right Honourable MP Norman Lamb. Norman, thank you so much for joining us today from Canada. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, good to speak to you.
Norman, just give us an update on what's happening across the UK with ATUs, and previously you were the Care Minister for the UK. What do you see, what's happening nationally?
Well, I guess I would say that not enough is happening, really, because if you go back to December 2012, we established the Transforming Care Plan. We published the Transforming Care Concordat, where we got all the key organisations to commit to a programme of literally doing what it says on the can, transforming care, getting people out of institutions and back into the community with support. But if you look at the progress that's been made since then, it's just far too slow. And the awful sense you get that it's sort of business as usual. We know that there's a lot of investment tied up in the provision of inappropriate care models, private providers that make a lot of money out of keeping people in beds, but also state institutions that survive because of the money they receive to have people in beds. And there have been too many barriers to the absolutely essential imperative of getting people out of institutions, and critically doing it safely, because we know that it's often quite a complex task. And my big worry now is that the government has set an objective of reducing beds by, I think, between a third and a half by next March. And because they haven't made enough progress, the danger is that they now do it in a rushed way, even to hit the lower end of that spectrum by next March, and that they discharge people unsafely without proper preparation, with the great risk that they then go back in as a readmission because the placement has failed. So I don't think we're in a good place. And Kevin, the interesting thing is that I'm speaking to you from Montreal in Canada. Mm-hmm. I'm at a mental health conference for the Canadian Mental Health Association. And I've been talking to people today about how they care for people with learning disability, with autism, but also with mental ill health in Canada. And they have moved decisively away from institutionalized care years ago. And they explained to me that very, very few people with learning disability or autism end up in institutions because they have proper support in the community. And I think one of the problems we have is that because these hospitals are there, these ATUs are there, we all assume that they're necessary because it's just been part of the landscape for so long. But when you find that another country gets by without them, without undermining people's human rights in the way that I think we routinely do in our country, you realise that a different approach is possible.
So Norman, why do you think the UK are still institutionalising people on the spectrum and putting them in these secluded, well I call them cells, because that's what they effectively are? Why are we doing this as a country, and why is countries like Canada so far advanced than us?
I think there's a whole range of factors. I think first of all, we have failed to transfer resources across from hospitals to community. We know that local authorities have been under enormous financial strain. So there is a very clear financial disincentive for any local authority to take on responsibility for someone who's going to cost the local authority a lot of money to support in the community, even if it's going to cost less than it costs the NHS to keep them in an institution. And we haven't been able to transfer resources effectively enough from health institutions into community support. So we haven't built up the capacity in the community to facilitate the discharge of people from hospital. Secondly, I think there is a problem that the clinicians who make critical decisions about whether it should remain under a section under the Mental Health Act, they are employed by the organisations that make the money out of keeping people in the beds. So again, there is a real conflict of interest there, which I don't think we have addressed adequately. And then there is the fact that families and individuals simply do not have enough rights in the system. I concluded as minister that you have to give people stronger legal rights to challenge decisions that are being made about the care of loved ones. We published a green paper, you may remember it, in the spring of 2015, just before the general election, but it's never been acted upon. It's never been implemented. So clear recommendations about strengthening people's legal rights has remained on the shelf. And I just think also there's been a lack of national leadership to really drive this change in the model of care. You need people who really believe in the need for change, the imperative of change, and the fact that this is actually a human rights issue, and that it is intolerable for us to carry on as we are.
So Norman, why do you think the government have still not actioned this green paper?
I just think it has never had enough focus or attention. For ministers in the Department of Health and Social Care, they're of course obsessing about the things that get all of the coverage in the media, A&E waiting times, access to GPs and so forth. And people with learning disability or with autism just don't get the attention that they need. So it's just ignored by those key ministers who could be making a difference. And I just don't think that they sufficiently understand what's actually happening out there in the country. So, you need to somehow convince those ministers that they have to give this greater priority. And that's why the campaigners who you will be talking to after you've spoken to me are doing such a critically important job, because they are making a noise, making it impossible for ministers to ignore it. And it's only by shouting loudly and continuing to demand change that we will get anywhere.
Norman, so what do you think should be happening then when somebody with autism or a learning disability is in crisis and they get sectioned under the Mental Health Act? Do you think they should begin into a community environment setting straight away, rather than being sectioned under the Mental Health Act and being put in these ATU treatment units?
Well, an admission to a unit should be absolutely the last resort, and it needs to start, incidentally, in childhood. I talked to a very impressive woman who leads the community learning disability service for children and young people in Norfolk. It's called Starfish. And she was telling me that over the last year, they haven't had a single admission into hospital for any child or teenager in their care. And she believes, she's previously worked, interestingly, in institutions, but she now has this very, very strong belief and commitment that you have to keep children and teenagers out of institutions, because she says once they're in, they tend to stay there. And she fights to avoid admissions. And if necessary, she or her colleagues will stay with the family over a weekend to see them through a crisis. And it's that sort of inspired leadership that we need a country. That's the model we need. A total commitment to avoid institutionalizing children and young people. Bear in mind that the numbers of children and young people in beds is actually increasing. With adults, it's declining, but it's not declining fast enough. With children, it's increasing. And that's really scandalous.
And I'm sure you'll agree with me, Norman, that patients who people with autism and learning disabilities are put in these ATUs, especially the ones in these secluded cells where they are, served through a hatch of some description, is absolutely barbaric.
It is absolutely barbaric. I remember visiting St Andrews when I was minister. It was a bit unusual. Ministers don't normally do this, but there was a girl called Fawzia who was aged 15 when she was admitted to St Andrews, and her family approached me and asked me to visit with them to see her in this unit at St Andrews, and I did that. I agreed to go. And I was horrified by what I saw. Here was, by that stage, she was 16, but she was kept in a room that was effectively a cell with nothing in it apart from a padded bench, which was fixed to the wall. And there was a seclusion room next door, which was even more like a prison cell. And, you know, if you treat someone like an animal, people, all of us, will tend to end up behaving like an animal. And I left that place determined to get her out of there, demanded that there must be a review. Eventually, she got out of that unit. She was incidentally being repeatedly, constantly restrained, physical force used against a 15 and 16-year-old girl. From the day she was discharged, she hadn't been restrained once more. So it just shows, you know, if you have people who are trained in autism and trained how autism affects that particular individual, and if they are in an environment which makes them happy rather than makes them stressed and anxious, then their lives can be transformed. When I visited Fawzia 18 months after she'd been discharged, she was a totally transformed person, loving life, with a real zest for life, and it was remarkable. People will have written her off. And I remember talking to her aunt. Her aunt told me she assumed that that was the life that was there for her for the rest of her life, because her well-being and her behaviour had deteriorated so much in that stressful environment. And then get her out, get her into the care of people who know what they're doing, and it was completely transformed. It was inspirational to see her.
Norman, I know you've got a busy schedule. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Thank you for your insight and knowledge, and thank you for your continued work campaigning around autism and ATUs. And, you know, your knowledge is absolutely tremendous. Norman Lamb, MP, thank you so much.
Great pleasure. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Norman. So that was Norman Lamb, MP, joining us live from Canada. And now we cross over to Sally Russell OBE. Sally, good evening to you, Sally.
Good evening.
Sally, just explain to us a little bit about what PDA is actually about.
Yes, absolutely. Well, PDA is autism. Demand avoidance itself can occur for a number of different reasons, and is actually a characteristic of people on the autism spectrum quite commonly. But in one particular group, it can appear to pathological levels, and it's a characteristic that you tend to see alongside perhaps excessive mood swings. And often these individuals are also somewhat more social, or appear to be more social than perhaps others on the spectrum. And so therefore you tend to find that because it's a little bit atypical, it's not necessarily identified as easily as more typical presentations of autism, in a similar way to that which we've seen with girls and females on the spectrum, which has really, you know, sort of hit the headlines, I suppose, in the last year or two. So it is something that was only really identified relatively recently. So research is still, to some extent, in its infancy. And so there is still debate about exactly where it sits, how it relates to other conditions. But despite that, it seems to be well recognised now that it's a profile within autism. But the key thing is that people need perhaps quite different strategies from others, and that's where the complications come in.
So Sally, I've seen comments flying about on social media saying that PDA is all made up, it doesn't exist. What would you actually say to this?
Well, I think it's very clear that the traits are there. To me and others in the society, it really doesn't matter what you call it, as long as the individuals who have those traits get the help that they need. And the reason why it's helpful to put some sort of wording around it, whether that be PDA traits or characteristics of extreme demand avoidance, whatever you want to call it, it helps because it then signposts the need for these different strategies to the professionals, to the individuals who work with somebody.
So if people need to come to you, the PDA Society, how can they contact you?
Well, there's a website, very easy to find online, pdasociety.org.uk. We have a forum, we have an inquiry line, so people can email in with questions, and we get very many, and we have a group of volunteers that support us with that on a daily basis. And we provide training. There are lots and lots of resources, so there's all sorts of information you can get from that.
So Sally, the stories, which we're not going to talk about individual cases here, but obviously you've heard, a few months ago or way back, where people with autism are being put in these seclusion cells or ATU centres. And we've just heard from Norman Lamb MP. What's your thoughts on this, and what do you think should be happening nationally?
Well, I agree with everything I heard from Norman Lamb, and it's wonderful to have his voice and championing the rights of these people, because he's absolutely right. There isn't enough focus on it. It tends to be ignored and forgotten, and it's just an outrage, to be honest. It's absolutely fundamentally wrong, ethically wrong, to be treating people in this way. I think that there is clearly a place for high-end, I suppose, assessment and treatment, and particularly for those with mental health problems, where you're trying to tease out what the issues are. Certainly people with autism, particularly with people with PDA, are often there, and there are, I'm sure, very many of them as well, for completely the wrong reasons, and those being that they are just not understood, and the way to work with them is not being properly understood. And if they have a proper diagnosis, if their condition is properly recognised, if people work with them in the right way, then they certainly wouldn't be there. They wouldn't even get there in the first place.
So what would you say also, Sally, if somebody came to you or to your charity and they went to the doctor with their child or adult, and the parent may say that the child or the adult's on the PDA spectrum or maybe autism, and the doctor as well, I don't know what PDA is, or probably doctors as you know, may have not even heard of PDA. How can we educate doctors about this condition, and how can we bring the awareness of the lack of understanding through PDA?
Well, we're really delighted that the NHS have recently updated their advice, and they do call for recognition of the PDA profile. So that is really welcome news and a great start. But obviously, that it takes forever to get down to the GP level. So we've got a long way to go. We're calling on local authorities, particularly commissioners, CCGs and so on, to produce position statements on PDA, and so that they can open up the debate and the discussion within professionals within their areas. There is increasing amounts of research being done on this, and there is huge body of evidence, including a survey actually that we did ourselves a few months ago of 1,500 people, which showed that the system as it is at the moment is failing to recognise demand avoidance in this way. But we are seeing quite a swing, and increasingly diagnoses are being given. But because some people think that it's still controversial, they tend to try and sort of almost hide the wording amongst other wording, and hide it within reports in case their colleagues start to criticise them. And this type of thing really has to stop. We just need to be open about what traits and what needs individuals have, and how they can be addressed. It's as simple as that. So we really need nice guidance to be followed, to be implemented. More importantly, we need to get, I suppose, an understanding in the workforce, and that will only be done by training. But at the end of the day, it's really got to start when people are getting their first qualifications. We don't have a workforce that is geared up for autism at the moment. Adult psychiatrists don't even learn about autism within their core curricula, which is just madness. So the individuals that they are then coming across, they're putting it down to personal health problems because they don't have the understanding that they need. So there are all sorts of issues around workforce and training, and we've got a long way to go. But I'm sure that if we can get the leadership in place, with commissioners particularly coming on board, it should get a lot easier.
Thank you, Sally. And also tell us a little bit about the EDM, which you've got out at the moment. What's the EDM? The EDM is an early day motion, but what are you petitioning and campaigning for with the EDM? Yes, well, that comes exactly back to this call to action. So we're very grateful that Sir Mike Penning has tabled this early day motion, who had a constituent that he met, and he was so taken with her story that he felt something needed to be done. So he's tabled it, and we have cross-party support and increased support from members, and we're seeking to get a debate in Westminster Hall on this issue. And the aim is that we increase recognition of the profile, but also that we make sure that local services are actually looking for this and practically finding ways to support individuals who have the condition. So would you encourage people who are watching this now or watching this on replay to contact their local MP to encourage them to sign up for the early day motion? Because obviously more MPs who sign up for it, then the much better that will get debated in Parliament. Absolutely. If they could contact their MP, and we've got a template online that you can read, so you've got the information that you need to be able to do it, or you can tweet them. But also just contact your own CCG. Make sure that you find good quality information to hand on to the professionals that you meet on a day-to-day basis as well. We've got to get to a point where, as parents, we're not always right, but we need to be part of the discussion and part of the dialogue in terms of working out what is best for our children, or best for us as individuals if we're the ones who have the condition. So we have to find a way to do this, and to, in the meantime, as far as we can, look to rescue. And I mean that in terms of, in the term that I'm using, we need a rescue mission to find those people in ATUs who have been misdiagnosed, who are not being supported correctly, in the criminal justice system, in learning disability units, in all sorts of places. We have people who are in crisis who shouldn't be there, and we need to find them and support them to find a better life. So, as we heard earlier from Norman Lamb MP, he was saying that that over in Canada, that it's a completely different system there. That people are integrated in the community, not put in autism treatment centres. So, why do you think the UK are so far behind? I think he's hit the nail on the head in terms of the separation between social care and health service, which creates so many barriers. And when people end up in crisis, and you don't understand how to support them, then the crisis gets worse, and you push them down and down and down the line, which just exacerbates the problems until there's nowhere else to go. So our problem is that the end of the line isn't where it should be. Our end of the line
in the same way that it has done in Canada, where we use community provision in a far more constructive and creative way. But it does take resource, and it does take sufficient facilities. And we've just been investing the money in the wrong place at the moment. And I was hoping that once we had a Department for Health and Social Care, somehow that would all sort of link up. But we seem to be as far away from that as ever. So it's rather a worry.
Well, we've got lots of messages coming in on social media at the moment. I'm just going to read a few of them out. We've had a message from Renee Allard from Canada. She says we have an IEP in our schools here in Canada, my province of BC, and most teachers, principals of schools are not trained either in autism. She also says we have contacted our MP regarding the EDM, but she is a shadow minister and cannot contribute. We have been told so. We've also got a message in from Jane Scully. She says an overhaul of the old system is needed. Failures all over, not just for education, but also social services, etc. All professionals should be trained in ASC. So we have lots and lots of messages at the moment coming in on social media. Sally, is there anything else you want to say before you go around about PDA and autism treatment units?
I just want to, I suppose, call out to individuals who are working in those units to say, if there's somebody that you feel is puzzling, that you haven't, that aren't responding the way you would expect them to respond, and where you don't really know what's going on, from experts. Experts in these slightly different atypical profiles that may not come up on the radar very often. It is the case that profiles like PDA aren't terribly common, but there is expertise out there that can help you unpick difficulties and find the right ways to support people. And it has to be a collaborative process. We need to be working with the professionals to support them, to help them understand.
Sally, Russell OBE, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been a pleasure to have you on, and no doubt we'll have you back on in the future. Sally, that's Sally Russell OBE joining us today on Autism Live Chat Show. I'm now being joined by Kerry. Kerry, thank you so much for joining us today on Autism Live Chat Show. I know you've been waiting quite a long time. Can you tell us what has been happening with yourself and your son?
It's a bit of a long story, really. My son's been in services, he's been sectioned for an awful long time, since he was 16. He wasn't in my care at the time. We've been through different pathways of different services, St Andrews. He's moved quite a bit to get nearer home, basically. But now he went away. The placement closed down suddenly, and the NHS had to move him fairly quickly, and they sent him to Rosebery Park at Middlesbrough. They wasn't geared up for autism at all. They haven't got any accreditations or anything like that. They really neglected him, so much so we thought we were going to lose him. It was that bad. He lost his speech, he lost so much weight, heavily medicated. We finally got him out of that situation and to where he is now. Sadly, it's not working. It is a learning disability unit. We did know that when they were looking for somewhere for him. He was in a low secure environment at Rosebery Park, but because we needed him closer to home, where we could visit him regularly and get him back on track, we knew that without us being able to do that, there was no chance. So we accepted a medium secure unit of a learning disability as a temporary measure, and I mean temporary until they got him to a state where he was able to function a lot better. Sadly, it's not been the case for a while. They've had many changes of staff. There is, I don't know whether you're aware, but there is a lot of the NHS are redeveloping the units. The one where our son is no longer going to be a medium secure. It's going to be a low secure unit, and they're no longer going to be taking autism. So he has got to look for somewhere else anyway. And they've got till February for this to happen. But in the meantime, he's been in and out of seclusion. Seclusion is like a cell. It's got nothing there, nothing in it apart from a mattress on the floor, no towel, no toilet roll, no hand wash. He's very bored, he's unstimulated, very angry, or he was very angry. And this can't be left to continue. It's inhumane. It's very upsetting for family going to see him in these conditions. And
it causes major problems for you, doesn't it, Kerry? Because you're a 40-minute drive away from your son, and you're wheelchair bound. So this is causing huge amount of issues for you on many different levels. If the government or any officials from the government are watching this tonight, what would you say to them?
Get your act together. Need something to happen now. You know, we thought Winterbourne was, you know, that got closed down. We thought something had come off from that. It hasn't. Nothing's changed. You know, these vulnerable people are getting abused. They're getting neglected. And they can't live. They're not made as a long-term solution, and that's what they're using them for. They're using them because they're a bit more argumentative, or they're a bit more of a handful. Let's put them into seclusion, and that's not the answer. Something's got to give, and you know, there's going to be less and less autism units. There's going to be no provision in our area that I know of. I know NHS are quite tired. They're wanting to kind of get people to their units or so they say, but the actions aren't coming.
So when we spoke earlier, Kerry, on the phone, you were telling me that your son's been in these units now since he was 16, is that right? And he's now 25?
Right, yeah. Yeah, it's 25.
You know, so that's an awful long time. You know, for him to be in them centres. So he's been in 17 places up to now.
Not 17. He's certainly been in quite a few different one units. St Andrews, he went into 2 different units while I was within St Andrews. It's not, you know, he wasn't in our care when he got mentally unwell, or you know, he needed help. They made it sound very good, and I would urge anybody that is looking or get social services coming around and saying, you know, we can give your son or daughter, you know, the independence, and you know, that make things sound so good. It isn't. Please think. Please make sure that wherever they go, that they're near you, not miles and miles away, and that the service is fit for purpose. If you know you aren't hearing good things about the service, don't let them go.
Kerry, we'll come back to you in just a second. If you just bear with me, Kerry, we'll come straight back to you. We've got Bethany's father on the line at the moment, but we need him on video. So if you can hear me, Jeremy, if you can switch your camera on for video, then we can bring you in on screen. So if you can do that for us, then we can bring you in on the show. So Sally, I know you're still with us, Sally. You've just been listening to the story of Kerry. You know, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. You know, it's just absolutely horrific that she's not getting her help and support.
Absolutely, and for it to be going on for 9 years, you know, these sorts of units are supposed to be temporary for a short period of time while you assess. They're supposed to be therapeutic. You have to ask, what therapy has he been receiving in the past, 9 years, and is he benefiting from it? And clearly, I don't know whether he's received therapy or not, but if he has, he's not benefited. It's not got him to where he needs to be, which should be back in the community again. So it is an utter failure and indictment of the system that we've got at the moment.
Kerry, we will come back to you in just a second, but I'm just joined by Bethany's father, and he's come on the show tonight to give us an update on what's happened with Bethany. Thanks, Jeremy, for joining us tonight. So
it's a pleasure.
Can you give us an update on what's happened with Beth?
Yes, things have really moved on over the last few days. Beth now has a core team of staff. They are, I think there's 1 or 2 staff from St Andrews, but another 22 people have been brought in from NHS. They have been completely upskilled with Beth's traits of PDA, and Beth has moved out of the seclusion cell into an extra care facility. So she's got a lounge, she's got a bedroom, she's got her own bathroom, and she's been having a good sort of couple of days. She moved out Monday, so she's had a couple of nights in there. The new team of staff have been absolutely amazing. They've been doing some sort of pet therapies with her. So she's been stroking dogs and cuddling guinea pigs today.
Excellent.
And it's all being done at Bethany's pace. That's the beauty of this.
And have you seen a behaviour change in Bethany's behaviour?
She's had a couple of wobbles, but it is a couple. And that is a massive reduction. So it begs the question, doesn't it? If this has been done so quickly and so effectively in a matter of days, then why did Beth spend 21 months locked up in a cell?
Yeah, and I know you mentioned previous on my show before, but earlier on you obviously missed it because you were busy, very busy, and we were speaking to Norman Lamb MP from Canada, and he was just telling us, over in Canada it's absolutely fantastic. They don't have any treatment units or centres over there. Everybody is integrated into the community.
Absolutely. The whole use of these assessment and treatment units, it must be looked at. How can somebody be left for so long? And there are so many people left for longer without an external body looking at what is the care plan for this person? Why is this person being left like this? Why aren't the suitable adjustments being made? They have proved in Bethany's case that it can be done and it works.
So do you think now, Jeremy, now she's got this care package and support, are you hoping that it will continue? And are you hoping that Bethany will be moved out there as soon as possible?
To say as soon as possible, it needs to happen at Bethany's pace. It's important that it's not rushed. I think there's an awful lot of learning needs to happen for the staff to fully understand what Beth does, and for that knowledge then to be able to follow Beth wherever she goes. There are already 2 experts from the Elizabeth Newson Centre who are looking at sourcing placements for Beth. So massive improvement, and it's it's sickening that it has taken such a media storm for that to happen.
And Jeremy, I don't know if you heard the conversation earlier with Kerry. She's having a horrific time at the moment. Is there any advice or tips you can give Kerry where her son's been, in the seclusion cell for so long now, and she's wheelchair bound, she's disabled herself, and she's just having such an horrific time? Is there any advice or tips you can give her?
We've obviously communicated, haven't we, Kerry? We've spoken a little bit, and it is rattle those cages as hard as you can. Get as many people helping you. People are on your side, and you don't realise just how many people that is, and how many people are touched by the emotions, and that's the key to it. And it's I feel guilty almost saying this, but in order to achieve what I've achieved, I have had to manipulate. If I'd have just gone in there and unloaded everything about Beth, then it would have been a massive sort of dump on people, and the story would have moved on. It was about very carefully and slowly just releasing little bits of horror every few days. And I think people just sat up and just thought, this is such a continuing thing. So to find out about a biro embedded in her arm, to find out that seizures were happening that weren't being investigated, it was very slow, it was deliberate, and it was very targeted, and you have to use the press. Walsall did not take me to court to protect Bethany, although that was their claim. They took me to court to try and shut me up, and it failed. The press, the media, Twitter, just as much as you can. There are lots of journalists out there clamouring for these stories at the moment. So milk that system.
So as Norman said earlier on, it's about people shouting and raising their voices about the what I call them institutionalised cells, which shouldn't be there. They should be completely abolished. And as I mentioned to Norman earlier, it's an absolutely barbaric situation where these people are placed in. It shouldn't be happening in the 21st century. And Norman was saying earlier, in Canada, they don't have any services like that in Canada. It's completely different. So he also mentioned about the Green Paper, the 2015 Green Paper. I don't know if any of you have read that the government have not implemented the 2015 Green Paper still.
I would be interested in looking at that. Sorry, can you still hear me?
The wheelchair.
Yeah, we can still hear you.
So, I'd be interested to see that paper. So, Kevin?
Yes, most definitely. We'll see if we can get hold of that and send everybody a link. So, Kerry, just coming back to you for a second, what do you want to happen to Christopher now? Do you want him out of that place, or...? Are you still there, Kerry? Technology seems to have lost Kerry. Okay, so Jeremy,
I can't imagine any parent wanting their child in one of those places, Kev.
Yes, most definitely. Most definitely. Well, I went to visit a local ATU centre in Stoke-on-Trent just yesterday, and what I saw of it, it wasn't. It was. They are communal places. There are activities going on, pool tables in there, lots of pictures in there, and different things that people had their own bedrooms. So it wasn't any way which I would describe it as like a cell type environment. I wouldn't even describe it as an hospital. It was like rooms where people stayed because they were in crisis. And I personally think that when people get in crisis, they should be having support at home or in the community. They shouldn't be segregated and locked away.
I totally agree. I mean, St Andrews is not just a cell. There is an awful lot of You know, it's a massively expensive building at Bethany. It's very new, and there are all of the games that you've mentioned. There are snooker tables, but as soon as they hit that challenging paper, that's when the cells come into play, and that shouldn't be a method of care for anybody at all.
We're getting a little bit of echo just on the feed at the moment. Kerry, just come back to you, Kerry. Can you hear me, Kerry?
My connection's not great. I don't know if you can hear me or not.
So, Kerry, if you can still hear me, what would you like to happen now with Christopher? No, unfortunately,
my connection's not great. It keeps going in and out.
Unfortunately, we seem to have lost Kerry. So, Jeremy, just coming back to yourself, what do you think? Yeah. What do you think the government should be doing now across England?
They need to review the whole approach to placing people in these ATUs, especially long term. If somebody's in an ATU past the point at which they're given a diagnosis, then there is a failing. There's an absolute failing. Bethany was diagnosed with PDA nearly 18 months ago now. So why did she then spend 18 months in a cell? Because they had not got any staff capable of delivering the care that she needed and the consistent care that she needed.
Yeah, and I know earlier on we were speaking to Sally, and I know we're not going to talk about, Sally doesn't want to talk about individual cases, but Sally did mention to me about that, you know, she mentioned that as well as Norman, they shouldn't be in these places, they should be in the community. You agree with me, Sally, on that one, don't you?
Absolutely. And you know, as Jeremy's just been saying, post-diagnosis, there has to be an environment that's not only specialist, but is sufficiently close to family, where the family can be involved. And so many of these ATUs are actually quite some distance for people to travel. So just to keep in touch with your loved ones. And that really doesn't help anybody's mental health, does it? So there are lots of reasons to be looking much more at getting specialist support within communities in the correct sort of facilities, properly staffed with people who don't change regularly, you know, with a continuity of care and proper expertise in issues such as PDA, so that they really can tailor the way in which they work to the individual's needs.
And Jeremy, just coming back to you, Jeremy, what would you say to parents, or if parents come to you, or anybody for that fact, if they have been in the same situation as you with their child, what would you say to the parent?
If you look at my Twitter feed, there is now so much evidence on there of what can be done and how quickly it can be achieved. I think parents need to be asking for these meetings and presenting what has happened in our case and saying, why can't you replicate this? You must remove the barriers to doing this for my child.
Well, everybody, it's been great to have you all on the show. Special thanks to Norman Lamb, MP, for joining us from Montreal in Canada this evening rather. And special thank you to you, Sally, Russell OBE, for joining me on to today's show. And Bethany's father, I wish you all the very best with your campaigning work. And, you know, I'm sure Bethany, you know, feels a hell of a lot better now, and you know she can move forward with her life as well as moving forward with your life as well. Unfortunately,
there's another piece coming out in the Telegraph this weekend, and hopefully loads more to follow. I'm not going to stop. I've got the meeting with Matt Hancock, Secretary of State, and he is demanding explanations from NHS, Walsall and St Andrews themselves, and I want that very much to be very open and very transparent, and I wanted to lead somewhere.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic, and I wish you all the best with that. And I'm sure you will do really well with that campaigning.
I look forward to coming back and telling you.
Yes, definitely campaigning. Please do. So, unfortunately, we seem to have lost Kerry, unfortunately, but we'll try and have her back on the show again. But many thanks for joining me, Jeremy. Many thanks for joining me as well, Sally, and Norman Lamb, MP in Canada today. Until next Monday, I'll be joined on the show next Monday by a lady who suffers from borderline personality disorder, and she'll be explaining to me what's been happening with her. Until then, have a great week and goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.